For 10 years, Theodore Walsh saw future value in Scarlet Horn's trash. Her corporate empire dumped failed engines and cracked blocks, seeing only junk instead of raw potential. Exposed, these faulty motors meant ruin, but in his wise hands they became tomorrow's hidden treasures. No press or paper trails, just Theodore restoring life to abandoned steel, while his young daughter slept soundly to the steady hum of progress. Patiently, he logged every piece, anticipating its eventual purpose. When her empire finally collapsed, the desperate leader had to seek out the keeper of her forgotten scrap. He breathed life into her forgotten scrap, and now she needs his wisdom to salvage her own ruined truth. The humble folks of Dunbar, Ohio, understood that quiet patience was the key to a good life. They knew success required hard work, patience, and recognizing the future potential in things others threw away. His modest workshop stood quietly at the corner of Maple and 9th Street. It was a humble one-story shop shielded by a weathered green roof. Under a wind-rattled roof, the original hand-painted sign still hung proud, a testament to enduring quality over fleeting trends. The faded olive letters leaned sideways, showing the beautiful character that only comes with time and age. Why replace something that still held its quiet strength? He focused his energy on rescuing far greater treasures. He rose before 6 every morning, driven by a natural sense of purpose. Like a master mechanic reading an engine block, he lived by instinct, feeling the natural rhythm of the day. He poured coffee into a chipped mug kept for 9 years, dressed in darkness, and checked on the daughter who was his future. Little 6-year-old Luna always greeted the day with messy, wild hair. Her unruly curls resisted the brush while Bolt, her treasured and threadbare toy bear, never left her side. Theodore would sit beside her, patiently untangling each knot, investing care into her morning routine. Slowly waking, her eyes barely open, she would blindly reach for the well-loved toy she cherished above all. "Horn trucks today." She mumbled it sleepily, head bowed, seeking comfort in a steady routine she already knew by heart. Theodore tied her last curl, answering with patient hope, "Probably so." By 6:30 he brought her to Grace Tillman's welcoming home. At 53, neighborly Grace had overseen his books since his 2nd year, keeping his quiet vision on track. She had no children but had quietly stepped forward. She filled a deep need in the child's life, creating a bond too precious for words. Back at the workshop, Theodore opened the heavy gates to uncover the hidden value waiting inside. Let's examine the contrast together. 40 miles away, Horn Automotive ruled from a 40-story Columbus skyscraper. Scarlet Horn took the reins of leadership from her father at 31, quickly transforming his legacy into a cold, relentless machine obsessed only with immediate gain. She was at her desk by 7:30. Clad in sharp black, her eyes were fixed solely on short-term profits glowing on the screens behind her. Unprofitable ventures were instantly discarded, blind to what they might eventually become. Her rushed employees joked that she possessed only 2 speeds, forward and absolute overdrive, never slowing to reflect. Yet every single Thursday, a company van drove 40 miles to Dunbar, delivering rejected machinery straight to Theodore's patient workshop. A silent driver would unload several broken engine units, leaving them behind like worthless scrap. They would drop a cash envelope on the pile of discarded metal and quickly drive away. Inside lay untraceable cash and a single document tracking the discarded parts they deemed hopeless. Just a rubber stamp and zero paperwork tracking these forgotten treasures. You and I see the truth. Where they saw worthless scrap, Theodore quietly saw the future of those engines. Theodore learned to stay silent, yet finding the value in that quiet proved terribly expensive. Let us watch this closely. That Thursday, Grace stood there, glasses pushed up, watching him accept another seemingly worthless delivery. She held a thick manila folder tightly. "That rejected V8 they dumped last week," she noted as the van drove away. "I checked its internal manufacturing code. That is the 3rd discarded engine from this same batch in 5 months." Theodore knelt by the scrap engine, feeling the cylinder wall, seeing its true future worth. He stayed quiet, reading the metal's history. "I know," he finally murmured. "Those other 2 discarded motors had the exact same mark." Grace opened her file, revealing the potential truth hidden within. Inside were photos, handwritten notes, and a printed sheet with yellow highlighted production codes. She tracked this discarded metal on her own time, seeing its worth. She believed every discarded piece held future promise, quietly documenting details before anyone saw why. Theodore took the folder, staring at the evidence of salvaged potential for a long moment. "Just stack it with the rest," he instructed. He had repeated those words for 10 years, storing away what others called trash. Consider this. They never spoke of what that rejected metal would one day mean, but both knew. The back room of the repair shop held 5 massive filing cabinets. Each cabinet was painted a soft blue, a quiet link to the life he left behind. It was almost the exact same shade as the walls. Inside the engineering break room of the corporate giant where he spent 12 years. The space where he ate, designed engines, and once, on a Tuesday 11 years ago, fiercely argued with Oliver Marsh over a fatal design flaw inside the HX4 engines. Because Theodore was once a brilliant corporate designer before he traded that future to run a small salvage shop. His genius was quiet, the kind that builds real value rather than chasing empty corporate praise. He had a quiet precision that saved complex machines from failing. The HX4 was his creation. Its core geometry and the precise valve timing sequence. Even the unique alloy, he spent 2 years of his life perfecting those hidden details. When the engine finally launched, his name sat proudly on the original design documents. Then a tragic Tuesday crash in November took his wife, shattering his entire world. Baby Luna was only 8 months old. Theodore took leave, but when he finally returned, the ruthless corporate world had moved on. Oliver Marsh, the ambitious director, who now controlled the company's product division, had stripped Theodore's name from the patents, handing his work to a team he never led. Seeing himself discarded like useless scrap, he simply lacked the energy and resources to fight. He opened this humble suburban garage instead. 14 months later, the first rejected engine arrived at his door. He instantly recognized the profound future value locked inside. These discarded engines dumped on his shop were more than just standard wear and tear. We can see the future truth here. They carried the very defect he flagged before his leave. The exact report Oliver Marsh had signed off on before throwing it away. Someone inside Horn was using Theodore's garage to hide their defective corporate scrap, quietly pulling the defective engines out of the official system. They dumped the bad inventory before auditors found it, tossing aside future evidence to independent shops where flawed engines were quietly scrapped, leaving no paper trail, just forgotten metal with future power. Theodore owned that forgotten scrap shop. He had the rare skill to revive those broken machines without asking dangerous questions. He needed money, and the powerful Oliver Marsh saw only a tool, overlooking the mechanic's true potential. So Theodore accepted that dirty cash. He did the grueling work, carefully preserving crucial details like unit codes and batch numbers, fault patterns, dates, costs, and a profound analysis of what really failed inside those cast-off machines. He filed this priceless, long-term leverage in old blue cabinets, 1 folder per delivery, perfectly organized. He did this because he knew that seemingly useless data held immense future value. Even under the crushing exhaustion of raising his kid and running a struggling business alone, he always believed this discarded evidence had future power, that these scrapped records would someday matter. Let's picture him late that night, after Grace handed over the latest discarded folder. His daughter slept nearby while a single lamp lit those cabinets full of cast-off secrets. The shop stools were worn out, and the concrete floor was freezing cold. A cheap fluorescent bulb had flickered above this forgotten garage for 3 long weeks. He ran his tired thumb across the worn tabs of this year's hidden files. 6 long years of discarded batch numbers silently exposing the fatal flaw. Engine series perfectly documented in the very report that the CEO threw away. 10 years of scrapped evidence proving the defect was just covered up, never fixed. He did not feel righteous holding it. He just felt exhausted. The heavy burden of a mechanic carrying another man's discarded sins for years, knowing this weight would eventually prove its worth. Because letting go meant discarding the only asset that could secure their future. He shut the cabinet of hidden value and checked Luna. The explosive news finally broke on a quiet October Wednesday. Theodore was fixing a salvaged brake caliper when Grace walked out of the office, holding her phone far out, as though the glowing screen held some toxic, discarded scrap. 340,000 vehicles, she said. 7 crashes, 2 serious. Theodore dropped the caliper. He already knew which discarded vehicles and engine series were flawed. He knew because he had preserved that thrown-away data for 10 years. You and I know exactly where his eyes went next, that row of blue cabinets in the back. For the first time, he saw the incredible, life-changing power of the heavy scrap he had guarded. Over in that shiny corporate tower, the collapse happened fast. It crumbled just like structural failures, hidden out of sight for years until it shattered all at once. That massive recall sparked a fierce investigation. They dug up discarded emails, and within 72 hours, stock plummeted 60%. The normal calls stopped, replaced by the panicked ringing of corporate lawyers scrambling to save their own future. CEO Scarlet Horn sat completely frozen. 11 at night, lights out, while the city kept moving right below her window, buzzing along as if nothing precious had been destroyed. She scoured every single document her lawyers pulled from the trash. The damning recall filings, the accident reports, that ugly investigation summary. But you and I know what broke her: a discarded 2012 memo. A discarded warning, penned by Theodore Walsh, held the key to the future. It detailed a fatal defect in the HX4 chamber wall, a tiny crack destined to destroy the whole engine. That vital warning was signed by Oliver Marsh, then buried out of sight. Treated like worthless junk, it never reached her desk. Her sharp attorney, Diana Cole, called that afternoon with a blunt warning of what lay ahead. Think about this. To secure her future, Scarlet needed an independent expert. Someone who could prove entirely from the outside that this structural defect had a long hidden history, ancient history, and that the choice to bury it happened far below her level. The only outsider who bothered to rescue and study those ruined engines, possessing the vision to decode their secrets, was a forgotten mechanic named Theodore Walsh. Diana managed to rescue his name from a forgotten parts return file that a smart junior associate pulled right out of the trash. This neglected file was years old, leading straight to a dusty junkyard in a small town 40 miles west. The next morning, Scarlet Horn drove herself out to Dunbar seeking answers. She had not driven herself anywhere in 4 years. Theodore was working under a rusted truck when her sleek sedan entered his yard. He heard the heavy door slam, then expensive heels clicking on his stained concrete. Not the wandering steps of a tourist, but a rhythm full of clear, desperate purpose. He slid out from under the discarded steel and stood up. She looked worn down, a stark contrast to her glossy cover photos. Her expensive blazer remained, but her posture's broken, her polished look clearly fading. We know that look. The shadows under her eyes showed an exhaustion sleep cannot cure. Theodore Walsh, she said flatly. It was no question. I know who you are, he replied. He grabbed a salvaged rag to wipe his hands, skipping any useless formal handshakes. 10 years I've been receiving your company's broken engines, just never had anybody call them that out loud. Those words were not a bitter attack, but simply an undeniable, long-hidden truth about her company. Scarlet believed she had calculated every single move for her future. She was unprepared for a man who saw zero value in her wealth or title. She confessed her desperate need for an outsider, a completely independent voice of truth. Solid proof that this structural defect was designed long before she took the driver's seat. Proof of deep structural rot, hidden by someone who knew the future cost of their silence. Theodore weighed her words in silence. Then he finally asked, "What are you offering?" She named an incredibly massive fortune. He looked past the doors. Outside, Grace led little Luna through the yard, holding her hand while the girl clutched a rusted bolt like a priceless treasure. "That is not what I need," he said firmly. "Then what?" He looked back at her, assessing her true character without any anger. He had the raw clarity of a man who spent a decade finding value in discarded truths, unable to pretend. "I need you to sit down and look at 10 years of records with me," he said. "And I need you to tell me when you are done whether you actually knew." Look closely. She did not answer immediately. The moment stretched. Suddenly, little Luna pushed the rusty door open, looking back and forth with the pure wonder of a child who did not yet see the invisible burdens we carry. "Daddy," the little girl asked, "is she here to fix a car or did she break one?" Theodore offered a faint, weary smile to his unexpected guest. "Go back with Grace, sweetheart." Luna studied Scarlet, instinctively weighing the visitor's true worth with wide eyes before slipping away. The heavy garage door slammed shut, Look closely. You and I see past the rust. These battered blue cabinets on the wall held far more than mere scrap. Scarlet paused at the threshold, weighing the potential of this dusty space before stepping inside. Theodore pulled open the first drawer, marking the exact year he began saving what others discarded as worthless. He pulled out a worn folder and dropped it onto the wooden workbench. Glossy photos, notes, and diagnostic sheets. Every piece of discarded history was meticulously dated, signed, and preserved. This broken junk arrived on a cold February Tuesday, he muttered. Batch 7743 Echo. Combustion chamber wall. A hairline fracture matching the exact failure pattern I flagged in that discarded corporate safety report the previous March. He tapped a greasy finger against a line of scribbled data. I spotted the flaw instantly. I built that motor from the ground up. I knew exactly which mechanical tolerance failed. Scarlet leaned closer to look. She understood the labels completely. She had just spent 3 days studying these very same numbers. This specific code, she whispered, it is on the massive corporate recall list. Most are. He stepped toward the next metal drawer. I saved 10 years of forgotten records. Every scrapped motor, every serial number, every ignored report. All mapped directly to the original HX4 blueprints. I kept those trashed files safe because that design was my life's work. He spoke without bitterness. He simply understood his own undeniable value. Scarlet slowly sat down on a nearby battered metal stool. She pulled a dusty folder from the middle of the stack and began reading. Theodore patiently let her take her time. You and I must appreciate this quiet patience. He simply stood there as she uncovered the forgotten truth over 2 long hours. When she finally laid down the last page, her expression held a haunting realization of what lay ahead. She looked like someone who had suddenly trusted a polished corporate lie, only to face the raw, unvarnished truth rescued from the scrap pile. A harsh reality that connected all the broken pieces. Oliver got your initial warning, she murmured. Before you left? Yeah. 14 months after they tossed me out, these ruined engines started arriving here. The first drop-off was 3 junked motors, identical batch. Same critical failure. He shipped this scrap to you because she froze. Because I could fix his dirty mistakes without asking inconvenient questions, the mechanic replied. And because he figured a desperate father needed cash. Plus, if this fraud ever leaked, a struggling grease monkey taking shady cash payouts looks entirely unreliable next to a wealthy executive. Scarlet absorbed the heavy truth in silence. Right through the thin shop wall. They heard little Luna softly humming a cheerful, innocent tune out in the salvage yard. How old is your daughter? Scarlet asked. 6. A heavy, uncomfortable quiet filled the room. I am so sorry, Scarlet whispered. Theodore stared back. Are you apologizing to my kid or to me? She remained silent. To him, that hesitation was her first genuine step toward future honesty. She stayed out in Dunbar, discarded like the very scrap around her. News crews swarmed her luxury high-rise, and lawyers warned her to lie low until the legal dust settled. So what do you and I learn from this? A polished executive sought her future redemption in a scrapyard, finding value among the broken every morning at 8. We searched discarded records looking for the truth. Just Scarlet, Grace, and me. Tracing a timeline from my buried 2012 report to the last delivery last month. Grace matched batch codes to recalls, treating those forgotten digits like someone who sees their future value. Salvaged properly, these scraps would eventually reveal the truth. By our second morning, Scarlet grabbed a salvaged wrench off my bench, gripping it in a way that would never work. I didn't say a word. I just reached over and corrected her grip, patiently guiding her hands like I would any beginner. She accepted the quiet correction in silence. She clearly wasn't used to being corrected without a lecture. But she was learning that inside this scrapyard, we see potential differently. My daughter Luna called her the lady with the nice coat and grease stains. Fair enough. By day 4, Scarlet asked the very question you are probably wondering, why not speak up sooner? When Luna was only 3, I told her. I had maybe $400 saved and trash bags of files I couldn't decode alone. Oliver Marsh had a massive legal team, I just did the math. I wasn't looking for sympathy, I was just stating the facts. That is the trap of the broken system you ran, I added. Without looking up, I kept tuning the calibration gauge, seeing the engine's future, not its rust. They do not even have to threaten you. They just make the alternative impossible, and then they wait. She sat in silence for a minute. I never knew, she finally whispered. I need you to believe that, even if it changes nothing. I believe you, I said, laying the old gauge down. The tragedy is a system built to hide true value, making it easy to just look away. She let that heavy truth sink in all through the afternoon. Oliver Marsh called her that night at 7:45. Parked at a cheap motel, her phone on speaker, she stared out at the dark street. I know exactly where you are, he warned. I know what you are doing. You and I recognize that tone. The cold arrogance of a leader who discards people, thinking he controls their future. Do not let that salvage mechanic ruin what we built. What you built, Scarlet snapped back. Then came cold silence. Think carefully, she ended the call. By dawn, they spun a new story. A newswire quickly dropped a toxic anonymous hit piece, painting me as a shady mechanic with a long history of pocketing under-the-table cash from a massive automotive giant, charging that my upcoming testimony had been completely bought off. The smear was brief, but it caught fire quickly. By 10 a.m., 2 regular customers canceled their engine rebuilds. I put the phone away, walked into the shop, and chose to focus on restoration. Grace came looking for direction. I told her to keep fixing what's broken. Scarlet arrived at 9, telling me face-to-face what Oliver team uncovered: 2019 tax records showing some underreported income from old jobs. Just messy papers, not a ruined future. You and I know how quickly a struggling man gets discarded, just because he cannot afford a high-priced accountant. On paper, his honest mess looked like worthless junk. You should know, she warned him. If he uncovers any more of this, it gets much worse, Theodore told her flatly. I did not commit a crime. My life was falling apart, so my records got messy. There is a difference. He met her eyes. If you need a cleaner witness, I completely understand, he told her quietly. I am not asking you to rescue my mess. Scarlet remained silent for a long moment. Then he is only hunting through your scraps because he is terrified. A powerful executive with 40 lawyers does not sift through a dusty mechanic's tax files out of confidence. Theodore remained silent. Later that evening, his little daughter Luna asked about the ugly rumors. She had overheard Grace. Children always notice the heavy truths that adults try to toss aside. People said bad things about you, she stated, simply reporting the ugly facts. Theodore sat down on the wooden porch steps, bringing himself right to her eye level. Some people did, he murmured softly. But I did not do a bad thing, I just did a very slow thing. Mending something broken takes patience. To those who only discard things, a steady rebuilding process looks like a pile of useless junk. Luna absorbed this slowly. Is Scarlet waiting here with you? She finally asked. I think she is starting to, Theodore replied. Grace eventually uncovered the hidden gem. She was sorting the forgotten 2016 files, those messy, overlooked years. The thick, cluttered records everyone else ignored. She spotted it at 11:47 at night. Theodore had already left. She should have turned off the lights and locked up hours ago. She grabbed the greasy shop phone. Come back, she urged him. Right this second. The worn folder she handed him dated back to late March 2016. Inside lay a seemingly ordinary delivery receipt for 6 salvaged engine units, and tucked inside a plain white envelope, stapled to the back, was a handwritten note on Horn Automotive paper. The handwriting belonged to Oliver Marsh. Theodore had examined enough discarded corporate memos to recognize that arrogant scrawl instantly. The scrap read, "Handle this, do not log it into the main system." The initials OM, that batch code linked directly to a tragic 2022 accident report. Dennis Greer, 41 years old, a father of 2 young children. He was driving that exact discarded engine series when a defect locked the motor at highway speeds. He survived the crash but never walked again. Theodore read the note twice. He flattened the crumpled paper on his workbench, analyzing its power under the harsh light. Scarlet arrived in less than 15 minutes. She stood by the tools, absorbing that reckless note in silence for a full minute. He treated your shop like a junkyard vault, she whispered, expecting you to blindly guard his secrets. He just assumed I lacked the key, Theodore replied. The critical call to Diana Cole happened at midnight. By morning, lawyers were preparing those overlooked scraps to spark a federal investigation. 10 years of dusty repair logs, the 2012 design flaws, that 2016 note. plus Theodore's technical breakdown, proving the broken engines he salvaged matched the deadly defect he identified years ago. Oliver Marsh arrived at the cluttered repair shop the following Tuesday morning. He arrived entirely alone, no wealthy assistant, no personal chauffeur. He drove his own sleek silver sedan, and you and I know the type. He parked perfectly, desperately pretending his shiny future was still secure. The man's suit cost more than a month of Theodore's salvage work, but fabric fades while grit endures. His cold face showed a negotiator focused on the present, blind to future consequences. Theodore stayed at his workbench, refusing to stand for a wasteful, short-sighted executive. Oliver tossed out his offer, expecting compliance. He was coldly precise, treating lives like the disposable assets he discarded. A flat cash offer, a blunt demand. He wanted the 2016 note, demanding those salvaged engines be labeled routine work, hiding their true history. In exchange, tax penalties would vanish, and any damaging future press would be buried deep. Theodore absorbed it all, then asked if he knew a man they discarded, Dennis Greer. Oliver stayed silent. 41 years old, Theodore noted, with 2 young kids. He drove a car with that defective engine batch you discarded, but luckily he survived. But he cannot walk. Theodore picked up a salvage tool, turning its worn frame in his hands. Not fixing anything yet, simply weighing its history. I read the local paper every week, tracking the small details others easily overlook. I make a habit of valuing the discarded details, seeing the potential others miss entirely. Oliver threatened him with lawyers, but Theodore calmly ordered the executive out of his shop. His voice never shifted. I have a real customer arriving at 10. Oliver stood frozen in Walsh Auto, slowly scanning a room filled with hidden truths. He saw salvaged tools and a faded calendar, remnants of time holding quiet value. A small picture of young Luna hung nearby, representing the future Theodore was protecting. Battered filing cabinets waited in the back, holding documents that would secure justice. He stared at these cheap items and realized their true worth outvalued his status. His high-priced lawyers and corporate influence could never defeat a man of true integrity. You and I both know a man defending the future cannot be easily threatened. Oliver walked out in complete heavy silence. Scarlet lingered outside the weathered building, having overheard every single word of truth. As Theodore stepped outside, she stood looking at the forgotten scrapyard, recognizing its hidden value. He will try another trick, she warned. Theodore simply nodded, expecting it. The salvaged records would not change when the federal hearing arrived on Thursday morning. Theodore arrived in simple pressed clothes, carrying a quiet dignity far more powerful than any suit. He carried the priceless evidence inside a cheap, discarded cardboard box. A simple $3 item, yet it held the power to shatter an empire. Sitting at the witness table, he prepared to reveal the undeniable truth. He started from the beginning, explaining how a discarded 2012 report foretold this disaster. The corporate shifts, 10 years of salvaged logs, and that key 2016 note. He presented his story just like a rebuilt engine, clean, precise, and completely solid. A committee member asked why he kept such useless trash for over 10 years. He paused quietly, gathering his thoughts before answering. Because I was an engineer at that company, he replied. Engineers never throw away data. One quiet sentence validating a decade of preserving hidden truths. Diana Cole exposed the technical breakdown, proving the value of every salvaged code. A timeline of hidden defect reports, leading directly to that incriminating 2016 memo. Oliver Marsh's own signature, discarding a broken batch of engines from the books, blind to future consequences. Watch closely as Oliver Marsh faced his inevitable reckoning the next morning. He brought 4 high-priced lawyers and a 47-page stack of expensive lies. But after 2 grueling hours of questioning, his flashy narrative quickly fell apart, revealing jagged gaps and contradictions that he could no longer patch up. The huge holes in his story. You and I know that truth always surfaces. His discarded records exposed those 47 pages as pure fiction. The final reckoning came 3 weeks later. Oliver Marsh finally faced criminal prosecution for hiding crucial evidence and covering up major safety violations. Scarlet Horn was cleared and completely removed as a suspect. Hidden deep inside the technical appendix, Theodore Walsh was named as the true source. Those dusty, ignored files prove that even forgotten scraps hold the power to expose giant lies. He read that one line slowly. Then he folded it and placed it on his workbench shelf, next to his framed photo of Luna. The following month drifted by just like any other at Walsh Auto Repair. The daily repair work stayed steady. A few curious new customers appeared after the news broke. Let us be honest here. People read his story and realized this quiet mechanic would never cheat them. They saw his true worth, and they were right to trust him. His loyal regulars kept coming back. The garage calendar filled up with routine alignments, maintenance, and a complex transmission rebuild Theodore was actually excited to fix. Grace carefully taped a brand new label to the front of those dusty blue filing cabinets. It read 2014 to 2024. She found a blue marker that matched the worn, faded metal of the old drawers. It made her smile. Scarlet arrived on a Friday afternoon, shortly before heading back to Columbus to rebuild her fractured automotive company. She wore a soft, simple coat, a far cry from her stiff corporate power suits, something bought from a local shop, rather than her expensive designer wardrobe. She quietly handed him a plain manila envelope without saying a word. Inside was a formal legal contract only a few pages long. His long-forgotten name anchored the very first paragraph. It was a binding agreement from the newly rebuilt company, restoring all his original rights. They were returning full credit for the engine to the brilliant designer they had cast aside. His discarded legacy was finally being restored in the official patent records and corporate archives. Theodore silently read the first page and then the next. He stood by his dusty workbench, holding the heavy papers with both of his hands. "I cannot return those 10 lost years," Scarlet said softly, "but I can give back your name." He folded the precious document along its creases, sliding it safely into his greasy workshirt pocket. He did not speak right away, but the quiet between them was not uncomfortable. It was the heavy peace of a room where a long burden was finally being laid down after a decade of carrying it. "Did you learn anything from all of this?" he finally asked her. She paused, giving his simple question some real deep thought. Just as she had valued those forgotten old files, he deeply respected that quality in her. "I learned," she replied quietly, "that the people we cast aside often hold the greatest value of all." He gave a slow, knowing nod. That answer was more than enough. Outside, little Luna ran from the lot, where she was turning old, cracked concrete into beautiful chalk art. She crashed right into Theodore's waist, never once thinking to slow down. Little arms wrapped tight around him. Then she studied Scarlet with that absolute, unvarnished honesty only children truly possess. "You're leaving today?" she asked. "I am," Scarlet replied. The proud executive knelt down to Luna's level, a gentle shift she couldn't have managed weeks ago. "But I'll remember this place." Luna weighed those words with the solemn gravity of a promise. "Remember it right," she insisted. "This is where my dad rebuilds engines. It's not a dump where people toss worthless scrap and walk away." The wealthy corporate leader stared, looked up at the hard-working single father, then back down at the child. "I know," she whispered softly. "I finally know the difference now." Theodore quietly walked her out to the waiting car. Warm evening light painted the shop's weathered green tin roof in brilliant gold. Their handshake wasn't some cold business deal, but a quiet, sincere acknowledgement of the deep worth they now saw in each other. He stood there, watching her luxury vehicle leave his humble lot and drive off toward the east. Back toward Columbus, back to her gleaming glass tower to begin the real work of restoring beauty to what others had discarded as worthless scrap. Then he simply turned and walked back inside. "Here is the secret you and I must understand. For 10 years, Scarlet used his shop as a graveyard for the burdens she refused to carry. What she never understood was that this patient mechanic was quietly collecting every broken piece she cast aside. Not because he was forced, and never for any selfish personal profit. He did not even have a grand master plan for those broken pieces. He simply knew that discarded things hold value, never passing wreckage without studying exactly where the future potential lay. Understanding what that damage meant, knowing those lost pieces could eventually be used to build a better future. He was entirely correct that every discarded piece would matter someday. But between you and me, he never guessed how much patience that bright future would actually require.